Welcome to the deep dive. You guys sent in a ton of mysteries that are seriously captivating, and we're ready to jump in and explore them with you.
I know. It's amazing how these mysteries, even though they're from different times and places, they often have these similar themes.
Yeah, like what?
Like the search for identity, trying to understand people's motives, and just this basic human desire to make sense of things that just don't seem logical.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive right into our first group of mysteries.
Okay. Sounds good.
We're going to start with a couple of cases that feel like they're ripped straight from the headlines, like a mix of technology, anonymity, and a whole lot of intrigue.
Ooh, I like that.
It's internet puzzles and high-profile hacks.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating combo, right?
Right.
Like the digital age has given us these crazy ways to connect and share, but it's also opened up these new paths for deception and manipulation.
And exploiting, like vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
It's like a digital hall of mirrors where it's hard to know what's real and what's not.
Oh, for sure.
Take the 331 puzzle, for example.
Okay, yeah.
For the past 3 years, this cryptic online challenge has popped up every January and left internet sleuths going crazy.
I can see why. Even the symbol alone is cicadas full of symbolism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cicadas, they're known for like being dormant for a long time and then suddenly emerging. It's a perfect metaphor for this puzzle that like appears and then disappears, leaving all these unanswered questions behind.
And the puzzles themselves are not easy at all.
Oh, no, not at all.
Like, you sent us some articles about it, and from what I've read, they're super intricate. They pull from cryptography, mathematics, literature, philosophy. It's wild.
It's like they're designed to test not just what you know, but also how you think outside the box.
Yeah, exactly.
You got these online riddles, and then there are reports of actual physical clues all over the world.
Really?
Yeah, like messages on monuments or hidden objects.
Oh, it's like a real-life scavenger hunt with global stakes.
Right.
Makes you wonder who's behind it all and what their goal is.
For sure. Like, what's the end game?
Is it a way to recruit people for some secret organization, some crazy social experiment, or is it just a bunch of geniuses messing with internet detectives?
Some people think it's a way for groups like the CIA or MI6 to find people who are amazing problem solvers.
Oh, interesting.
You know, the kind of people who can crack codes or find hidden patterns in tons of data.
It's like something out of a spy movie.
I know, right?
Speaking of security breaches, let's move on to a case that really shook up the world. The 2014 celebrity iCloud hack.
Oh, yeah. That one really showed how vulnerable even famous and rich people are in our connected world.
I remember this so clearly. It was a huge invasion of privacy.
Sure.
Dozens of female celebrities had their private photos leaked online.
This wasn't just some random hack, it was targeted.
Really?
Yeah. The hackers went after high-profile people specifically, using weaknesses in Apple's security systems back then.
Wow. And
Yeah.
the list of victims was insane. Huge. Jennifer Lawrence, Scarlett Johansson, Kim Kardashian. It felt like everyone in Hollywood was affected.
Pretty much.
It made everyone wonder how safe our data really is in the cloud, and if anyone is truly protected from these kinds of attacks.
Right. It's a harsh reminder that in this digital age, the line between public and private is getting blurrier and blurrier.
Yeah, and that even people who can afford top-notch security can still be victims.
Exactly.
The FBI got involved, but they never publicly said who did it.
Interesting.
It really makes you think, what was their motive?
Yeah, like, was it for money, a weird sense of power, or something else entirely?
Yeah.
Some experts think it was a mix of things.
Okay.
Maybe a group who wanted money but also loved the attention and chaos they were causing.
I could see that.
Yeah, no matter the motive, it forced a lot of us to rethink our online security and the choices we make for convenience and connection.
Totally. It's this constant balancing act, isn't it?
Definitely.
Weighing the good stuff about technology against the potential risks to our privacy and security.
That's the tough part.
It's definitely something to keep in mind as we move on to our next set of mysteries, which take us from the digital world into some really heavy human tragedies and the desperate search for answers.
Yeah, these next cases are really powerful.
Yeah.
They remind us that behind every unsolved mystery, there are real people, families struggling with unanswered questions.
And just this longing for closure that may never come.
It's tough.
In 2014, 43 Mexican high school students disappeared after being stopped by police on their way to a protest.
Oh, wow.
It's a story of alleged corruption, brutality, and a search for truth that's still going on today.
Wow, that's intense.
It is.
So the official story is that the students were handed over to a drug cartel and killed,
Right.
but there's no solid proof. There were conflicting stories, and the students' bodies have never been found.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of skepticism and anger.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a heartbreaking case that shows the terrible impact of violence and corruption, especially when people in power are involved. And it also shows how important independent investigations are.
Definitely.
And the fight for justice, no matter how difficult it is.
Couldn't agree more.
Now, for a completely different puzzle, we have the strange case of Ricky McCormick, who was found dead in 1999 with 2 encrypted notes in his pockets.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting.
Right.
McCormick struggled with basic writing, but the notes they found on him were filled with complicated codes.
What?
It doesn't make sense.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Did he create them? Were they messages for someone else? Or were they just random scribbles that people are reading way too much into?
Good questions.
The FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, their top code breakers, worked on this for years.
I bet.
They even asked the public for help, but to this day, those codes are still unbroken.
It's crazy how even simple things can become huge mysteries.
I know.
Like holding secrets that might stay hidden forever.
It's also kind of a reminder that there are limits to what we can understand.
For sure, even with all the tools and technology we have.
We might never know what those codes meant, or if they even played a role in McCormick's death.
It's true.
It's like staring at a locked door. You know there's something on the other side, but you don't have the key to open it.
I get that.
It's both frustrating and intriguing, isn't it?
Totally. Like this desire to know, to solve the puzzle, even when the answers seem impossible to reach.
Exactly.
It's just part of being human, you know? This drive to understand the world around us.
That's a good point.
And I think it's what keeps bringing us back to these mysteries, even when they're super hard to solve.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think that those codes, even with all those experts working on them, are still a mystery.
Right. Like, we still haven't cracked the code.
It makes you wonder what secrets they might be hiding.
Totally. It reminds us that we don't know everything.
Yeah.
Even with all our fancy tools and tech.
Yeah, some mysteries just want to stay mysteries, I guess.
It seems that way.
Okay, so speaking of mysteries that have confused people for decades, let's switch gears to some historical enigmas, you know? We've got ancient glyphs, strange figures, and stories that blend history and folklore.
Oh, I love those kinds of stories.
What's so cool about these cases is that they make us look at the past, not as like a finished story, but more like a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like we're invited to imagine and fill in those gaps.
We become detectives ourselves.
Yeah, piecing together clues, thinking about different theories, and realizing that our understanding of the past is always changing.
I love that perspective.
All right, so our first stop is Dighton Rock in Massachusetts.
Okay, cool.
Imagine a giant 40-ton boulder
Wow, that's huge.
covered in these strange markings called petroglyphs.
Yeah, those are cool. They're like images or symbols carved right into the rock.
Right, exactly.
For those who might not know, you can find petroglyphs all over the world.
Huh, interesting.
They give us these really cool glimpses into the cultures and practices of people from way back when.
That makes sense.
And in the case of Dighton Rock, these markings have been confusing people since like the 1600s.
Oh, that's a long time.
I know, right?
So we're talking about this rock face with all these geometric shapes, figures that look kind of like humans and animals, and even some characters that almost look like letters from some old alphabet.
Sounds mysterious.
Right. And over the centuries, people have come up with all these theories about who made these markings.
Like who?
Well, everything from Native American tribes to Portuguese explorers, Chinese sailors, even ancient Phoenicians.
Wow, that's a lot of different possibilities.
It's like everyone wants to connect this rock to their own version of history.
That's a historical Rorschach test, right?
Exactly. So, from all the research you've done, are there any theories that seem more likely than others?
Well, more and more people are starting to think that the markings were probably made by Native Americans.
Okay.
But even then, there's debate about which specific tribe or tribes might have done it.
Oh, I see. So it could be even more complicated than that.
Exactly. It's like a visual record of different cultures coming together in one place.
Yeah, that makes it even more interesting.
Totally. And it just shows us that history is rarely a simple story.
Right. It's more like a messy, layered, and open to interpretation kind of thing.
Exactly.
All right. So speaking of stories that really capture the imagination,
Okay, let's hear it.
our next historical mystery takes us to 12th century England.
Okay.
where we meet the green children of Woolpit.
Oh, I love that story.
Me too. It has everything a good legend needs. Mystery, an unusual appearance, and a language barrier to make things even more intriguing.
It's a story that's stuck around for centuries,
I know, right?
inspiring so many interpretations and even artwork.
I can see why.
It just shows how much we're drawn to the unknown, to the idea of other worlds,
Totally.
and the power of stories that are hard to explain.
All right, so picture this. 2 kids, a brother and a sister, show up in a field near this village called Woolpit. They're wearing strange clothes, speaking a language no one understands, and get this, their skin is green.
Whoa, that's wild.
I know, right?
I can only imagine how the villagers must have reacted.
Oh, I bet it was a mix of everything: fear, curiosity, suspicion.
Definitely a bewildering encounter.
Totally. So these kids were taken in by a local knight,
Okay.
and they slowly started to adapt to their new life.
So did their skin stay green forever?
Well, that's the crazy part. Their green skin eventually faded away.
What?
Yeah, they learned English and told their story, saying they came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where the sun never really shone.
No way. A land with no sun.
That's what they said.
People must have had a field day with that one.
Oh yeah, there've been so many theories about why their skin was green.
Like what?
Some people think it was because of their diet, like they weren't getting enough vitamin.
Okay, that makes sense.
Others think it was something in their environment, like maybe exposure to arsenic.
Oh wow, that's a bit darker.
Right, and then there are the more out there theories, like maybe they came from an underground world where there's no sunlight.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. And of course, some people think the whole story is just an allegory.
Like a symbolic story.
Yeah, maybe representing the clash between cultures or the fear of the unknown.
Ooh, that's a cool interpretation.
It's amazing how a story from so long ago can still make people think and debate.
I know, right? It really makes you think, is it history? Is it folklore? Or is it both?
It's like it's asking us to be okay with not having all the answers.
And to embrace the power of our imagination.
Exactly. And to realize that sometimes the best mysteries are the ones that don't have easy solutions.
Well said.
So now we're going to shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We're moving on to mysteries that are a bit closer to home and definitely more chilling.
Oh.
These are unsolved cases that have left communities terrified and families desperately searching for answers.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
So we're talking about cases where people are hoping to find their loved ones, or at least get some sense of justice.
Yeah.
These cases are tough because they show us that the world can be a dangerous place.
Yeah. And that sometimes the hardest truth is that some questions may never be fully answered.
It's a tough reality to face.
Okay, so our journey takes us to Canada, specifically to a stretch of Highway 16 that's known as the Highway of Tears.
Oh, wow. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a road that's become associated with tragedy and unanswered questions.
From what I remember, there were a lot of disappearances and murders along that highway.
You're right. Between 1969 and 2006, at least 18 women were murdered or disappeared along this isolated stretch of road.
That's awful.
It is, and a lot of the victims were Indigenous women.
It's so sad how often that happens.
It really highlights the vulnerabilities and injustices that marginalized communities face.
It's a systemic problem.
And the stories behind these cases are even more heartbreaking.
I can only imagine.
We're talking about daughters, sisters, mothers, friends whose lives were cut short.
And whose stories were never finished.
Exactly. One of the youngest victims, Monica Jack, was only 12 years old when she disappeared in 1978.
12 years old?
Yeah, and her remains weren't found until 1995.
Oh my gosh, that's devastating.
I know, it's unimaginable what her family went through for all those years.
But to live with that kind of uncertainty.
And that's just one story among many.
Right, there were so many others.
Well, investigators believe that an American serial killer named Bobby Jack Fowler was responsible for at least 3 of the murders.
At least they caught him for those.
Yeah, but most of the cases are still unsolved.
It's just not right.
It really shows how, for many families, justice is still out of reach.
Absolutely.
The Highway of Tears serves as this really somber reminder that we need better safety measures, better investigations, and more awareness of the dangers that Indigenous women and girls face.
We can't let these cases be forgotten.
Exactly. We need to keep asking questions, pushing for answers, and fighting for justice.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so from a lonely highway to a tragic Christmas Eve, our next case is full of mystery and sadness.
What happened?
It's the disappearance of the Sauter children.
I've heard about that one. It's a story that really stays with you.
It really does.
Especially because it happened during the holidays.
Yeah, a family's holiday joy turned into a nightmare.
I can't even imagine.
So on Christmas Eve, 1945, a fire broke out at the Sauter family home in West Virginia,
Okay.
and 5 of their 10 children vanished without a trace.
Just gone.
Gone.
Awful.
Can you imagine the horror of that night, the frantic search, the desperate hope that they'd find the missing kids safe?
It's just heartbreaking.
And there were some suspicious things about the fire itself.
Like what?
Some people said they saw a man messing with the electrical wiring in the days before the fire.
Oh, wow. That's really suspicious.
And then there were inconsistencies with the fire investigation.
What do you mean?
Well, some of the appliances they found should have been destroyed in the fire, but they were strangely intact. Right. And the fact that they never found any human remains, despite how intense the fire was, made people think that maybe the fire was set on purpose to cover up something even worse.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying.
And to make things even stranger, in the years after the fire, there were some really odd events.
What happened?
In 1968, the Sauters got a photo in the mail.
A photo?
Yeah, and it seemed to show one of their missing sons as an adult.
Whoa, are you serious?
They hired a private investigator to look into it, but the investigator disappeared too.
No way, that's just creepy.
It's like the more you try to unravel this case, the more questions pop up.
Yeah, it's like a maze with no exit.
Was the fire an accident? Were the kids kidnapped? And if so, who took them? What happened to the investigator?
It's just too much.
The Sauter case is one of the most confusing missing person cases in American history.
It's a case that really makes you think about the darkness that can exist even in ordinary places.
And that sometimes the answers we're looking for might always be just out of reach.
It's a hard truth to swallow.
It really is. It's just incredible how these cases, even after so many years, still have this hold on us.
I know, right?
Like the Sauter children, the Highway of Tears, they really make you wonder about the world and the darkness that can be hidden in plain sight.
It's true. And as we dig into these last few mysteries,
Yeah.
we're going to see even more unidentified victims, killers who vanished, and cases that just leave us with more questions than answers.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's start with the Bear Brook State Park murders in New Hampshire.
Okay, yeah.
This one is super unsettling because it goes on for decades.
I know, right?
And there are multiple victims, some of whom we still don't know who they are.
It's a case that shows how important forensic science is, especially DNA.
Yeah.
Like, it can really help untangle these complicated mysteries.
That's true.
But it also shows the limits we face when we're dealing with cases that span such a long time, and victims who might have been living on the margins of society.
Right. So back in 1985, a hunter found this metal drum in Bear Brook State Park.
Oh, okay.
And inside were the skeletal remains of a woman and a young girl.
Oh, wow.
It took years to get a DNA profile from those remains.
Yeah, I bet.
And even longer to connect them to other victims.
Really?
Yeah. Then in 2000, another drum was found in the same park.
Oh my gosh, no way.
This time with the bodies of 2 more young girls.
That's horrible.
It's like something straight out of a horror movie.
I know, right? It gives me chills just thinking about it.
Who would do something like that? And why?
Great.
Were these just random acts of violence, or was there a connection between the victims and the killer?
So many questions.
DNA analysis showed that the woman and one of the girls in the first drum were related,
Okay.
and that 2 of the girls in the second drum were also related.
Interesting.
But not to the first 2 victims.
Ah.
So that suggests there's some kind of complicated family connection, but the 4th victim, she's still a mystery.
Wow, so you have multiple victims, a killer who managed to hide these bodies for years, and we still don't know who these people were or why they were targeted.
I bet that's incredibly frustrating for investigators.
Oh, totally.
To be so close to solving the puzzle, but still missing those crucial pieces.
I can't even imagine.
Then in 2019, thanks to these advancements in genetic genealogy,
Right.
investigators were finally able to identify the woman and 3 of the girls.
That's great.
But that 4th girl, we still don't know who she is.
Oh, wow.
They also figured out who the killer probably was.
Really?
A man named Terry Rasmussen,
Okay.
who had a history of violence and lying.
So it finally got him.
Well, he died in prison in 2010.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of bittersweet, isn't it?
Definitely.
The win for forensic science and the hard work of those investigators, but also a tragedy for the victims and their families.
Yeah, they might never fully understand what happened or why.
It really emphasizes how important it is to never give up on these cases, no matter how cold they might seem. It's true.
Every victim deserves justice, and every family deserves answers.
I completely agree.
All right, for our last stop on this deep dive,
Okay.
we're going to the shores of Long Island, where a series of unsolved murders has left a community living in fear and a killer, or maybe even killers, still out there.
Oh gosh, where on Long Island?
It's the case of the Gilgo Beach Killer,
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that one.
also known as the Long Island Serial Killer.
Right. There's something about that case that's just really disturbing.
Yeah, it's a lot of things.
Okay, like what?
First, the number of victims, at least 10 that we know of, and maybe even as many as 16 or more.
That many.
Yeah, and then there's the fact that this killer seems to know how the police work and has been able to avoid getting caught for so long.
That's scary.
And then there's the fact that a lot of the victims were women involved in sex work,
Right.
a group that's often overlooked and vulnerable.
Yeah, that's so true.
The case started in 2010 when Shanann Gilbert, a young woman who worked as an escort, disappeared.
What happened? She vanished after visiting a client in Oak Beach, this gated community on Long Island's South Shore.
Okay.
While they were searching for her, police found something awful.
What?
The remains of 4 other women,
Oh no.
all wrapped in burlap sacks and dumped along this deserted stretch of Ocean Parkway.
That's just awful.
Over the next few years, they found more bodies, some scattered along the beach, others buried in shallow graves.
Oh my gosh.
It's like the killer was playing games with the police,
I know.
leaving clues that led to dead ends.
And get this.
Yeah.
The killer might have even talked to investigators.
What?
Yeah. In 2009, a year before they found the first bodies, a man called one of the victim's sisters and taunted her about her sister disappearing.
Oh my God, that's terrifying.
Right.
They traced the calls to a burner phone that was used around Times Square, but they could never figure out who made the calls.
It's just chilling to think that he could be out there somewhere, maybe even planning his next move.
That is.
The Gilgo Beach Killer case is still open.
It-
Yeah, and investigators are still working on it, hoping to finally unmask whoever's responsible for these terrible crimes.
But for now, the mystery remains.
Yeah.
It casts a long shadow over Long Island.
And it's a reminder that even with all our technology, some predators can stay hidden and anonymous, leaving behind so much pain and so many unanswered questions.
It's a lot to think about, but it also reminds us that we need to stay aware, look out for each other, and never stop fighting for justice for those who can't speak for themselves.
Couldn't agree more.
These mysteries, even though they're unsettling, they remind us how fragile life is, how complex humans are,
Not fair.
and how powerful the unknown can be.
They also show how important it is to think critically, to question what we think we know, and to consider different viewpoints.
Totally.
We may never have all the answers,
True.
but by thinking things through and asking questions, we can at least try to make sense of the world, even when we're faced with its most confusing mysteries.
That's a really great point. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up.
That's good.
What stood out to you from all these mysteries? Which one would you most like to see solved? Let us know. And remember, keep digging, keep questioning, and never stop exploring the mysteries around us.
That's